6:15 p.m. Not that long ago, many of our critical infrastructure, including our communication systems, power generation, and distribution, operated in isolation. Today, these systems are becoming much more complicated and interconnected, both geographically and across technology sectors. In 2020, a massive cybersecurity attack on Texas-based information technology firm Solarwinds allowed foreign operatives access to sensitive information to both private companies and government agencies. In March 2021, an attack on Microsoft's Exchange server, exposed nearly 60,000 companies to cybersecurity risk. And in recent years, the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Department of Homeland Security have released reports that hackers are conducting broad assaults on the country's electric grid, water processing plants, transportation centers, and other critical infrastructure. As we innovate in the telecommunications and energy fields, protection of our critical operating system requires close attention. Confidence in data and systems security is key if we're to benefit from the efficiencies of an increasingly tech-savvy world. Keeping our critical infrastructure secure requires us to understand both evolving threats and risk mitigation efforts. While the Public Service Commission does not directly regulate cybersecurity, we are interested in creating the opportunity to provide information on utility cybersecurity programs as a public service. And so we are very fortunate to have cybersecurity experts from each of the 3 DC regulated utilities with us today to give us an overview of their work. For telecommunications, we have Wes Sabat, Vice President of Network Security at Verizon. For electric industry, we have Joseph Quinn, Manager of Security Public Policy at PEPCO. And from natural gas, we have Ed Rooney, Manager of Network and Infrastructure Services, Cybersecurity, Washington Gas Light Company. We look forward to your remarks, gentlemen, and I will turn the table over to Mr. Sabat from Verizon. You're on mute, sir.
Yes, thank you very much for the introduction, and really appreciate it. Good afternoon to everybody. My name is Wes Sabat. I'm responsible for Verizon's network security. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today. And as was mentioned, share some information about what we do to secure the critical infrastructure that makes up our telecommunications network. So at Verizon, we do have very extensive managed and professional services that we use to meet our customers' needs, and we support enterprises, the public sector, all the way down to individual consumers. But the scope of my team's responsibility really focuses around cyber defense and governance of the entire Verizon network. Our scope is all the critical network infrastructure that carries the customer's traffic. So examples of that would be the public IP network, better known as the internet. A subset of that is our Fios footprint, or high-speed fiber to the premise, to customers, businesses, and homes. And then in addition, the wireless networks, which carry our LTE and now 5G traffic. So let's move to the next slide, please. Okay, as we all know, cyber threats are really growing against all networks. This is being seen not only against enterprises in the public sector, but again, it's impacting individuals as well. So part of what Verizon tries to do is we try to understand who these different adversaries are and what type of attack methods that each of them are likely to use. And then we use that information to try to help build the best defenses possible against the attack. So as you can see from this slide, I've grouped the actors into 4 different categories. Part of this is based on industry data. Part of this is security incidents that we have seen ourselves. And part of it comes from a data breach investigations report that Verizon publishes along with a bunch of other security companies and government agencies from around the world, where each year we look at data breaches that occurred for the last 12 months and try to get to the root cause and study those so that we can help the industry in general really improve their defenses. One of the big findings for us and in the DBI was that money continues to be the main motivator for cyber attacks. So obviously in the first group with the cyber criminals, we've really seen significantly increased activity. And specifically, we've seen that around ransomware, and ransomware that's very much directed at public utilities, schools, hospitals, places where it can do the most damage. And ransomware is basically a form of malicious code, and it's used to encrypt the customer's breached data until a ransom is paid. Second in this category, and it was discussed earlier, really are the nation states. So as mentioned earlier with the Solarwinds breach, the US has officially declared that Russian actors were behind that. And it's very likely that Chinese actors were behind the Microsoft Exchange breaches. While these actors can be financially motivated, like the criminal actors, they're also very interested in things like intellectual property, patents, designs, and other confidential information that they can monetize. Data is the new money. The third group that we work to protect against are really the hacktivists. And one of the things that we see most often with a hacktivist is they use denial of service techniques, which is typically a massive flood of traffic with the intent to disrupt. This can be emergency services. This can just be a bank's website. And these attacks typically align with whatever their social cause is. And lastly, I put down automated attacks, and really that can apply to all 3 of the actors, because the challenge for us as an industry is that the attacks are becoming more and more automated. Just like my team uses big data that benefits from machine learning and artificial intelligence to defend against the attackers, unfortunately, we're seeing the same type of automation within their techniques. So an example would be, it's estimated that an Internet of Things device, which are becoming much more prevalent, if it's exposed to the internet, it takes less than 6 months or 6 minutes for that to be completely compromised. So on the next slide, I want to talk a little bit more about the 4 examples of what good looks like at the bottom, and really focus on what we're doing with proactive cyber response. So next slide, please. Okay, so how do we basically put up our defenses and better understand these attackers, and how do we make sure that we're protecting our networks and our customers from them? So at Verizon, we really have a very significant investment in our cyber risk management program. A big part of that, frankly, is our people, and that involves hiring the right people, making sure that they're properly trained, and then providing 24/7 support to our networks and our customers. We decided to standardize around the Nist cybersecurity network, and that is something that we have used to measure our program and better understand our cyber maturity and how that stacks up against other technology companies, other telecommunications companies. A big part of the program is to help us identify areas where we need to mature, and we use the program as a guidepost to drive prioritization, and that drives resulting projects and the investment in both technology and people that we need to secure the network. So in terms of this framework, when we talk about the first bullet, it's really critical that we are applying and identifying the scope across our entire set of applications, network technology, and even people. People being the human perimeter who are often individually attacked, even in a company. The next thing we really try to focus on is security by design, seeing that as the critical concept to help protect our products and networks. It helps ensure that we really have a North Star architecture that we're moving to, because just like the threat actors are constantly evolving and changing their techniques, we have to do that as well. The other big change that we made is we wanted to make sure that we're embedding and thinking about the security controls at the beginning of our product life cycle in all of our network builds as we're working that with our vendors. The other concept is that in general for a network, we feel like anytime you have individual layers of protection, they're going to get defeated. So we have a multi-layered defense. And a great example of that is we have multiple layers of defense and things that we can do against DDoS attacks. But even at the end of the day, with the best defenses, it's critical that we apply detection capabilities for the malicious activity that's occurring across our network. Part of that is that we actually red team ourselves. And that means we ourselves act like a threat actor, or we hire a third party to act like a threat actor to see, are they able to compromise anything? And as they're doing it, are we able to detect it and work to go in and resolve that issue? So we believe even the best defenses can and will be penetrated. So we deploy technologies and techniques like machine learning to really be able to detect, respond, and block these attacks with automation. The other part of our defense is that we feel like we've developed great and mature intelligence partners. We work with people like CISA, and part of that is helping us to prioritize and defend and detect against the most impactful attacks. Where we do have a security incident, we have a mature and tested security incident response plans. Those are tested through security incidents that we do have. And then we also schedule tabletops with our senior executives to run them through the different responsibilities and decisions that we have to make in case there was a significant security attack. And then lastly, we really want to make sure that we can recover from the incident. We have a big focus on reviewing the lessons learned. Why did the incident happen? And then identifying and implement ways that we can be better the next time. So in closing, it's important for the public to know, while it's impossible to prevent all types of cyber attacks, we do have robust layers of protection and detection capabilities in place. And if needed, we use our mature cyber response capabilities to minimize the impacts to our networks and customers. The other public service announcement that I would put out is that the cyber industry estimates that there's currently a 3 million person gap in the cyber workforce. So Verizon is working very actively with colleges and all the way into high schools to improve the gap. We have a lot of programs that from an education standpoint are funded through our Foundations program. And we would really encourage more people to explore cyber, as it truly is an exciting job opportunity with a very diverse set of career paths with it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your presentation, and we thank Verizon for participating today. Next up, we'll turn to Mr. Quinn at PEPCO. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman, and thanks, Wes, for your presentation. I think we'll see a lot of the same themes throughout mine. So let's just jump right in. We can go to the next slide, please. One slide back. Here, we'll start here. So my name is Joseph Quinn. I am the Security Public Policy Manager at Exelon, and we support PEPCO in terms of our cybersecurity program. PEPCO is one of the utilities that's owned by Exelon, and we employ this defense to each of our utilities. So now we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So a couple of things I wanted to highlight here. I'm just going to give you an overview of the cybersecurity program at Exelon, how it supports PEPCO and our other utilities by talking about the structure, the governance framework we use, and then a little bit through how our incident response plan works. So a couple of things that are important on this slide are, one, we have a 24/7 secure cybersecurity operations center in Maryland. Our team is collected of over 200 people that all work in corporate security. And two of our main goals for this year, projects that we're working on, were OT security governance. So we're talking about the devices that actually make changes to the electric grid, things that open and close parts of the transmission lines, and then as well as third-party security supply chain. Those are two big areas of focus for us this year. Go to the next slide. This is a little bit how we're structured. There's 4 main buckets of work within corporate security that report through the Chief Security Officer: cyber, security operations, security governance, and physical security. And you can see some of the teams that report to those groups that consist of the 200 folks that I just mentioned on the previous slide. And in a little bit, this will make a little more sense because I'm going to show it in relation to the Nist cybersecurity framework, which was teed up for me by the previous presenter. So we can go to the next slide. When we talk about the mission of the security team at Exelon that supports PEPCO, we talk about it in terms of reliability and resiliency. So what we mean when we say reliability is, are we delivering what our customers expect us that we are delivering? Are the lights coming on in your house? Does your air conditioner work in the summertime? That's reliability. Resiliency is, what happens if something doesn't go as planned? How quickly do we respond to the event and get back to status quo? So reliability and resiliency are 2 big themes with how Exelon does through the cybersecurity. One other thing I wanted to call out on this slide, and it's a theme that you'll see anytime somebody talks about cybersecurity, is we want to foster a culture of security within Exelon broadly. So there's almost 50,000 employees. Some of those are in PEPCO. We want everyone to take a step of accountability and responsibility for protecting the company. And we do this in a variety of ways. One of the most notable is our phishing program. And our phishing program is a test that's designed to spoof an email that would potentially be a malicious actor who would try to get company data by getting you to click on a link. This is a great way to, one, keep cybersecurity on the forefront of the minds of our employees. So we have this program that is designed to trick you. And through training and other resources, we've gotten a really mature phishing program that keeps cybersecurity as a topic that everyone feels responsibility for. Additionally, the electric sector is a highly regulated sector, so usually in some cadence we're going through a cybersecurity audit through NERC-CIP. This year, Exelon is actually going under a NERC-CIP audit for all of its opcos. So that's another way that we test our program, and we'll talk a little bit more about how we test in a couple slides. But we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, I think that this slide's a great way to visualize how Exelon protects its assets. So we have assets in with Exelon Nuclear, Exelon Utilities, Exelon Power, Constellation, and Corporate. And there's situations here where we're highly regulated by either NERC or the NRC, which have upstanding compliance programs that are mature and in a state of continuous improvement. When I was just mentioning audits in the previous slide, those are the kinds of things we're talking about. Those groups are audited, and the governance structure in place is with NRC standards and with NERC CIP standards. For the parts of our business that are not regulated by either the NRC or NERC CIP, we employ the Nist cybersecurity framework. And this is a series of controls that we assign to owners throughout the company, and we call them control owners. So these are people that cybersecurity isn't part of their day job, but they have controls in place that they're responsible for. One of the great ways that we test them is we require them on an annual basis to attest to these controls. And then periodically we audit those controls internally on the non-regulated portion of the business. So it's a great way to continue that theme of driving a culture of security through employees that aren't just in the cybersecurity program. So just quick takeaway from this slide, we're highly regulated by the NRC and through NERC CIP. And in the situations where we're not regulated, we employ the new cybersecurity framework, which I'll talk a little bit more about on the next slide. So this is a way that we visualize the Nist cybersecurity framework within Exelon. And it's meant to be read from left to right. And some of these things were just talked about by Wes, but it's identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. We say these things all the time. When we say identify, we mean we need to understand the cybersecurity risk to Exelon so that we maintain reliability and then we are resilient if anything happens. When we say protect, it's to implement safeguards to deliver our critical services. Detect is we want to be able to identify the security event. And there's some examples of security events just below there in the red and white text. And then respond, we want to take action in response to any event that occurs. And recover is we maintain plans for resiliency, and we also want to importantly restore the capability that was damaged or potentially impaired by the event. So this is a good way to visualize, and just to call back to an earlier thing I talked about, you can see here that the different boxes, those are all functions of the teams in our org chart. So every single one of these has an owner in corporate security that's responsible for a portion of identify, a portion of protect, detect, respond, recover. So on the left side of detect, that's reliability. On the right side, that's resiliency. And we can go to the next slide. But there is, you can have a great program, you can have a great governance structure, but it's really important to test your program regularly. And these are some of the examples of how we test our cybersecurity program at Exelon. Vulnerability assessments, patching is a huge component of what we do. We do some cyber threat hunting and red teaming. We talked a little bit about phishing. Internal audits are also a great way to identify gaps or things that need improvement. And then the last one, and I'll talk a little bit more about it in a bit, but regular updates to our leadership and our boards are really important. And then also informal conversations with our partners at local and state levels, as well as, you know, benchmarking with peer companies. That's a great way where we learn maybe best in class practices, maybe other things that we hadn't considered, or, you know, we get a sense of what we're doing is, it's effective. So thank you. We can go to the next slide. And now I just wanted to talk through our incident response plan. So we call it our CSIRP, the Cybersecurity Incident Response Plan. That's a photo of the cover on the right side, and you can see all the utilities we support. But at a high level, the CSIRP is a document that I think it's about 100 pages. And through that document, we have the roles and responsibilities for the people that need to be involved in an event. We have templates for how they respond for their roles in the event. There's a team that's stood up when an event occurs, and we walk through the cybersecurity incident response plan to make sure the right people are in the right places to do their jobs. And this is part of our resiliency. How do we get back to, you know, day one? How do we restore any service that's impaired? The cybersecurity incident response plan is a huge part of that. We also conduct tabletop drills on this with our executive leadership, and we use real events like SolarWinds or Microsoft Exchange to have a conversation internally. Like we conduct a lessons learned or a hot wash right afterwards to see, how can we improve this for next time. It's a very mature process and it's very well organized. And anybody who has operated around an incident response plan, it's really key to the success of your security team. Two other things here: the cybersecurity incident response plan, the CSRP has reporting obligations. So every time, because we're so highly regulated, we do have reporting obligations at a federal and state level. When something occurs, we are talking through whether or not any incident meets the threshold of a report. But we're finding more recently that there's really a value in what we're calling a voluntary disclosure, and that's a situation where the facts of the situation do not indicate that we need to report this to our regulator, whether it be at a state or a federal level, but we really value being able to share information about what we know with our regulators. And in some cases, we learn more from the regulator. In some cases, the regulator says, hey, you should really talk to so-and-so. It's becoming more of a practice with our program as we're still identifying what's happening to be able to share this information at both the state and federal level. And then through here, it just talks through some of the drills and stuff as well. But just the highlight from this slide is the incident response plan is a really key component of our cybersecurity team. I think that concludes the information I presented. Are we on to the next slide? Yeah, so I just wanted to say thank you. And just in the spirit of what I just said about voluntary disclosures, forums like this are a great way for us to tell our story, to talk about how effective we think our team is, and then also invite folks to come and meet with us to talk about best practices or just to have peers in the industry or across industries, because cybersecurity is not just a niche topic anymore. We're talking about it in places where we never thought we would be. So thank you for the time and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Quinn, and thank you to PEPCO. Just remind everybody, we're going to have a round of questions from my colleagues and myself after Mr. Rudy's presentation. So we're just holding our questions for then. I do have questions for you. Just wanted you to hang around and be aware. So now we'll turn to Mr. Rudy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Beverly, and thank you and welcome to Commissioner Thompson. WGL appreciates the opportunity to speak on this crucial topic. So a little about me. My name is Ed Rudy. I'm the Cybersecurity Operations Manager for WGL. I've been with WGL for over 20 years in various roles, from network architecture, security architecture, manager of infrastructure operations, to my current role, manager of cybersecurity operations. And I can say that since joining WGL in 2000, I personally witnessed the cybersecurity operation team grow from a small organization to a well-defined, experienced, and mature organization. So I'm going to approach this a little differently based on the questions that you had in the presentation. So our first question is, do you have a cyber risk management program and plan? If so, is the program plan based on a recognized cybersecurity framework such as Nist or NERC-CERT? The answer to that question is WGL uses Nist as our cybersecurity framework and complies with ISO 27001 standards. WGL sees social engineering, phishing, ransomware, malware, password attacks, and denial of service as our most prevailing threats. As a result, WGL has initiated several cyber awareness training programs. Next slide, please. Awareness and culture. WGL requires all employees and contractors to use WGL systems to complete monthly cyber training exercises. In addition, we deploy mock phishing campaigns on a regular basis and measure the results of those that clicked on embedded links within the email, as well as those that successfully reported the mail as a phishing attempt. Those that clicked on the embedded links are assigned additional cyber training exercises. It is important that everyone knows cybersecurity is the responsibility of all employees and all contractors working on behalf of WGL. So continuous security monitoring. In addition to 24/7 cybersecurity operations, layered security, and advanced cybersecurity tools, WGL also subscribes to multiple advanced real-time threat intelligence feeds. WGL performs regular penetration tests that help us understand where potential gaps may exist. So network segmentation and firewalls. WGL maintains and manages physically separate networks for corporate and OT with separate MSP, SIMs, and multiple firewalls. In addition, OT applications and systems are blocked from the internet, allowing only required security tools that are restricted to specific vendors on specific ports and in specific security and network zones. Identity and access management. WGL uses a vendor-specific identity and access management tool that is regularly audited, including the use of multi-factor authentication for access to corporate resources remotely. Patch and vulnerability management. WGL has a patching and vulnerability program that ensures patches are installed at least once per month, more if specific patches are released, and vulnerability managed scans that are actioned based on the severity of the results. Next slide, please. Cyber delivery. The WGL cybersecurity organization consists of operations, architecture, governance, risk, and compliance. We all work together to ensure a cohesive cybersecurity operations program. And then the next part of the question was, do you have a cyber incident response policies and plans in place for minimizing the effects of a cyber incident? So WGL has specific cybersecurity incident response policy, playbooks, and plans. In the event of a cybersecurity incident, the cyber incident response plan is invoked and all critical stakeholders attend the response meetings. The severity of the cybersecurity event will determine subsequent actions, including isolating systems and network segments if needed, notifying executive management, involving local and federal authorities, and notifying the commission. At least one tabletop exercise is performed each year to test the effectiveness of our plan and to continuously improve our response capabilities. Next slide. So what the public needs to know about how utilities are preparing for attacks on their information networks and control systems, or what does the public need to know? The public should be aware that WGL takes cybersecurity very seriously and is taking as much action as possible to minimize the effects of a cyber incident. We're continuously assessing our cyber risk and investing in the technologies and tools to sustain a high level of cybersecurity. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. This concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Rudy. And now we'll hear from we'll have questions from the commissioners, and I'll get us started. And after everybody to come back on, because I really have a question that's applicable to everyone. So, you know, as a state regulatory body, yeah, I view my role and my duty similar to like a surgeon. The first rule is to do no harm. And so recognizing that you all have talked about that you have very sophisticated cybersecurity risk plans and response plans, I never want to get in the way of any of that. But I am curious, since you're all also multi-jurisdictional entities, can you talk a little bit more about what you think the role of regulators, in particular state regulators, are or should be in this space? I know that each of you mentioned something about testing. You mentioned something about reporting obligations when something happens. And I welcome you to talk more about that. But I also just want to know, is there any value in anything beyond that with regard to collaboration and working with state regulators?
Well, I can go first. Yeah, I think that there's certainly a value of us working with state regulators. One, to just make sure that we understand that we're talking about the same things. We're finding in the jurisdictions within which we operate that sometimes we'll get questions about something that's in the national news, and it's a version of, does this impact you? And it would be really nice to have a conversation about that. in a way that we're not tied up with, is it a formal, notification? Just information sharing is one way to make things a little bit easier. And in some ways, the best way to do that is if there's just a meeting between security personnel within the district. If we're meeting regularly, then that's a forum where we could talk about those things. But yeah, information sharing is great, and it would be beneficial if it weren't in a way where we're having a conversation of, is this reportable at the same time?
Yeah, the one thing I might add is, and I agree with the comment on, different areas may see different type of attacks. So sharing different information can be really helpful. I think the other thing that makes sure that we're doing things consistently, and I think we all have incredibly complex jobs, is if we have standards in place that are as close as possible to each other. So one of the things that comes out of my mind are standards around privacy, for instance. And we had CCPA roll out in California as one of the first items. And what we did as a company is we actually didn't just look at our California residents for that. We actually assumed and came up to that standard for all of our company. But as other states come out with different privacy laws, we're really trying to move to kind of a more flexible way of being able to report to that privacy. But as different localities do things differently, that can add some complexity into what we do. So where we can try to find common standards across the board, that would be helpful.
I'll just comment too that a lot of people may not know that the commission, we meet at least annually with each of your organizations and your security teams to get information. So informally, we do talk. And so I appreciate that availability and continuing that process. I'll also note that some of our sister jurisdictions, there are annual reporting requirements, whether or not there's an event or not. That is something that we're also considering and taking a look at here in DC. And I cut you off, cut Washington Gas off before they were able to chime in. Would you like to add anything on that point, sir?
Just a little bit. I mean, from my perspective, I would like to see a little bit more threat intelligence sharing, especially among the critical infrastructure. I mean, I think it's important that we all work together to secure that environment. That's all I had to add. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. I'll ask one more and then I'll open it up to my colleagues. One thing that we're really focused on in DC is achieving our climate goals. And we recognize that this is something that cuts across all jurisdictions and involves other agencies beyond just the Public Service Commission. We're also very focused on grid modernization. We've had an ongoing grid modernization proceeding for quite a while. And so from your experience, I just like to ask the question, do you see any type of increased threat, or is there any type of concerns that we should have as we move to a more digitalized, modern, and really focused toward meeting our climate goals? Is there any considerations that we should take note of beyond what we've talked about already? We'll start with Washington Gas. Mr. Rudy.
Thank you. I mean, I don't know of any more considerations that you'd be taking right now. I think the commission is doing a fine job managing the utilities the way you are now.
we welcome that comment all day long, sir. That's excellent answer.
No, the only thing I would add, because we absolutely share your desire. Verizon has committed to become carbon neutral by 2035. One of the items of interest for us that I think the industry could do a better job on, because I think one of the ways that a lot of efficiency is going to be driven are things with the IoT ecosystem that is popping up. So you're talking about now billions and trillions of IoT devices popping up. Those are coming in from a variety of different OEMs, a variety of different nations are creating those OEMs or creating those IoT devices. And the standard around those IoT devices is, in my opinion, is not as good as it should be. I think that there could be better standards around it. As Verizon, we participated with both the federal government and with different industries to define standards for IoT devices. But at the same time, we have really put in a lot of protections and level of defense against the potential threat from IoT devices. So I do worry about IoT devices, the efficiency, which is going to be fantastic that we gain from IoT devices, but we've got to make a concerted effort across the industry to make sure that people are putting in secure IoT devices.
Mr. Quinn?
Yeah, and I'll add that anytime you talk about new technology being added to the grid, recently supply chain security has just been a major concern for us. Is how are we doing effective testing on devices before we install them onto our network? So any help that the commission could offer with that would be great. And I'll note that, between the Department of Energy, Department of Commerce, DOD, there's the federal agencies are also trying to jump in. So as long as it doesn't contradict with something that they're doing, if it's supportive and through NARUC, and to Wes's point before, the jurisdictions we operate in are different. So people want different things. So anytime there's an opportunity to consolidate or to have like a national standard, that would be great. And we've tried to influence some stuff through NARUC in the past, but anytime new devices come into the system, we're worried about how are we going to effectively test these before they go live.
Excellent. Well, I will now turn the show over to my colleagues. Commissioner Beverly, I believe we have him on the line. Commissioner Beverly, do you have any questions for the first panel?
Just one general question, and I'm sorry I couldn't get access to my computer to be able to join you that way. But I'd just like to know if the district presents any unique challenges that you can discuss and how you think the commission might be able to help with that.
Yeah, this is Wes from Verizon. And the one thing that I will say, and I don't have this area of responsibility, so I'm probably not going to give as robust an answer. But our chief security officer also has responsibility around physical security. So based on things that happened in Nashville and other places, we're constantly concerned about physical security threats that may damage our building, hurt our employees, that type of thing. So we have a variety of plans with those, and I think that that's a really important consideration when I think about DC.
Okay. And you would, of course, you don't have to do it right now, but you would, of course, share with us if there are challenges that you're having difficulty meeting that the commission can help with.
Absolutely.
Okay. I encourage you to do that because I wouldn't otherwise know. And if there's some breakdown in communication between a district government agency and this commission and your company, I'd like to know about it. There may not be things that the commission can actually fix, but we can certainly try. But that was my only comment, my only question.
Thank you, Commissioner Beverly. Commissioner Thompson, do you have any comments or questions?
Yes, I do have one question and one comment. First, thank you for the presentations. They were very informative. My question, each of you can answer it if you would like. More of the developments with all of the vulnerability in the various types of attacks. What keeps you guys up at night? What what is the biggest worry in terms?
I had a little bit of trouble hearing the rest of that question, but I think the crux of it was what keeps us up at night.
That's what I heard as well. I believe we lost.
Yeah, cut out. Yep.
Then I would say the supply chain issue again, but also new regulation that can contradict something that's already out there. So if something comes out at a federal level when there's a really good program at a state level, or there's good reporting requirements that we would prefer match, because we are going to employ the same security practices regardless of jurisdiction, but it's just internally within the jurisdiction. If there's a different reporting requirement, we meet it differently there. So supply chain security, new devices coming onto our network that maybe we want to make sure we're testing appropriately, and then legislation with short lead time to implementation.
Yeah, and I would go back to my previous comments, and this isn't really a legislative issue, but I'm concerned about the workforce, and I'm concerned about the ability to source and hire the appropriate number of cybersecurity professionals that we need in the industry. It's a enormously growing and complex industry. And the job market for it is very, very tight. So anything that we can all collectively do to grow and improve that workforce, grow the diversity of that workforce, is incredibly important to us.
I'm glad that you mentioned diversity, especially with regard to this particular area, cybersecurity and physical security. I've worked in this space for a little while, and I believe that's something that is lacking. I know that we have an advisory council here at the commission focused on supplier and workforce diversity, and I'm also involved at the NARUC level. I took a note when you said it initially. That's something that I want to work with our sister agencies here in DC to see what we can do. I know PEPCO and Exelon, we have an infrastructure academy that's focused on some of the grid modernization efforts that we talked about. But I'm not aware of any type of regional or even national program looking at diversifying the talent pool for cybersecurity. And that's something that I'd like to look into some more. So thank you for raising that very important question. We're at the top of the hour, and so I want to give everyone on here an opportunity to just have a final word and to wrap things up, and we'll move on to our second panel. So we'll start with you, Wes. Do you have any final words for us before we part?
No, I just really appreciate the conversation. It was great seeing the other two presentations and the fact that we are very aligned. So honored to be asked to present today. Thank you.
Mr. Rudy?
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. It was a great opportunity to present here today. I appreciate it.
We thank you for being here. And Mr. Quinn?
Yeah, I'll just echo what the other folks said. Thank you for having us here. Great opportunity. We look forward to more conversations like this.
All right. Well, we thank you, and we will have follow-up conversations. Again, a lot of what we do in this space as the commission, it is informal. And so this is the first open to the public session that we've had. We will look at this and evaluate whether or not there's a need to have one on a more regular basis. But this has been very, very helpful so far. We thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So with that, we're going to take a minute here. We're going to reload. I know our IT team is bringing on our second panel. And let me just say, our next panel moves into a discussion on the top emerging cybersecurity risks in the energy industry. We're interested to hear how national agencies and regional companies are working with utilities and other stakeholders to prepare for cyber attacks on our utility systems. With us this afternoon, we have distinguished representatives from federal agencies, and again, companies who can speak directly to these issues. We're pleased to welcome Manny Cancel, Senior Vice President of the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, NERC, and CEO of the Electricity Information Sharing and Analysis Center, EISAC. Next up, we have Steve Mcelwee, Chief Information Security Officer at PJM Interconnection. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Joseph McClellan, Director of the Office of Energy Infrastructure Security, OEIS, at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. I know Joe for a very long time, so I apologize for fumbling your name. Just put all that on me and my nerves, and let that not be a reflection on our relationship. So with that, we will start it out with Manny, please.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Chairman Phillips. Great to be here with you this afternoon. I'm Manny Cancel. Chairman Phillips shared my title. So I've been with NERC for just a little over 15 months. Prior to that, a long career in the utility industry with a large IOU in New York City, where I was most recently their CIO. So pleased to be with you today.
We're glad to have you here. Do you have a presentation, or do you have anything that we need to queue up?
No, I don't have any no decks or slides to queue up today. So, and I thought you were going to go through introductions first, but I'm happy to continue.
You know, we have provided on our website and information everybody's background, so I'd like to jump straight into your comments and what you have to present on behalf of your organizations. Please proceed.
Sure. Sorry for that mix-up. So, you know, you heard a lot from the previous panel about the threats that we're facing, and, you know, hats off to folks in all these critical infrastructure sectors who are working hard to address the risks that we're facing. You know, at NERC, you know, our primary mission is to ensure the reliability of the electricity, the bulk power electricity system across North America. The ISAC's role in that is to make sure that we maintain situational awareness regarding cyber and physical security threats that could potentially impact that reliability. So obviously a role and responsibility that we take quite seriously. You know, obviously the events of the past year and certainly the past 6 months where we've seen certain specific threats, and I'll illuminate or enumerate them shortly, have really just, again, underscored that the volume, the velocity, the complexity, particularly of cyber threats, just continue to increase, right? So last year during the pandemic, you know, our attack surface increased dramatically with the number of folks that were working remotely and essentially providing additional entry points into enterprise and corporate networks. But more recently, into the tail end of last year, starting with the Solarwinds supply chain compromise, you know, again, we saw the true capabilities of these adversaries. They are very smart, they are very sophisticated, they are very persistent, and they do possess the capabilities to disrupt critical infrastructure. So, you know, again, underscores the need to watch this very, very closely. In addition, you know, obviously physical security risks. So the ISAC not only, as I mentioned, monitors cybersecurity, but we obviously monitor physical security risks, and particularly physical security as it relates to critical infrastructure. And while we haven't seen an incident like the Metcalf incident that occurred a few years back, nonetheless, those possibilities exist. And certainly civil unrest activities and extremist activities that potentially target critical infrastructure are top of mind and something that we pay attention to. So, you know, what the ISAC is really focused on is providing timely and actionable information to the sector. And interestingly enough, despite the pandemic and working remotely, our output increased dramatically over the past year. So we doubled the amount of bulletins and notifications that we issued last year during the pandemic. We focused on some critical risks. So one is supply chain risk. And that took on a couple of flavors. Some of that was associated with bulk power equipment, meaning transformers that were manufactured in foreign nations. And we work with our partners at FERC to issue an alert to sensitize the industry to this issue, as well as to establish extent of condition as well. That also played out again with the Solarwinds Compromise and the Microsoft Exchange Compromise, where we also issued alerts to sensitize the industry and also try to get impact on the state, on the extent of condition as we go forward. You know, I could talk a lot about what's going on in the ISAC, but I want to turn some time over to our other members of the panel here. Again, getting information out on the timely actionable information is probably the paramount thing that we're focused on. But making sure that the industry is aware, situationally aware, and this came up in the last panel as well, encouraging information sharing. So again, not so we can necessarily attribute or cast aspersions onto the quality of a program, but so we can maintain awareness and protect the sector is very, very important. And again, from an opportunity, and you've undoubtedly seen this as part of President Biden's and the Department of Energy's 100-day plan, the focus on operational and industrial control systems, you know, which is clearly an opportunity. It's an opportunity that the ISAC recognized last year when it updated its strategic plan, because clearly this is the greatest risk to the energy sector, right? You know, adversaries will likely go after those assets if they're looking to compromise the sector in any way. So there is an opportunity to focus more deliberately on industrial control systems and control systems, understand the threats that are impacting them, understanding our adversaries' capabilities to disrupt those systems, and then taking the steps to make sure that we mitigate and protect those assets against those risks. So I'll take a pause there and see if there's any questions, or, you know, perhaps we can turn over to another member of the panel.
I do have a quick question, and before you turn it over to the next person, you talked a little bit about the ISAC and NERC, and part of what we're doing here today is just to educate people, you know, really on what's going on in this space. And so I think oftentimes people like us who practice in this area, we take for granted that people know our roles. I mean, I think a lot of people have heard of NERC, know about NERC, know about the CIP cybersecurity standards. But can you talk a little bit about the relationship? Why is NERC involved so heavily in this? What is the role of ISAC, especially with regards to communicating with and collaborating with our utilities?
Certainly. So again, it goes back to what I said earlier about ensuring the reliability of the bulk power system, right? And again, given the capabilities of our adversary and their potential ability to impact critical infrastructure, the ISAC remains focused on this, right? Not from the compliance perspective so much, but really from the situational awareness perspective. So the ISAC is an organization of about 50 people. We maintain a 24/7 security operations center that monitors physical and cybersecurity threats, and is also the first sort of line of response in terms of getting information out to the sector. So that organization actually developed that or implemented that 24/7 capability earlier last year. And it's been, you know, successful through a number of metrics. I mentioned earlier that the amount of information that the ISAC has pushed out has grown dramatically, and that's a direct result of establishing that 24/7 capability. In terms of our membership, so our membership, a little over 1,000 members, which represent the full diversity of the utility industry in North America. That includes investor-owned utilities, public power entities, as well as smaller municipal power entities as well. So one of the, I think, things that we have to remain focused on is the diversity of the industry and the diversity of capabilities across the industry. And what we try to do is essentially provide ground truth regarding threats and risk mitigation activities. So a good example, if you use the Solarwinds Compromise, as a proxy to talk about what we do. When we first learned about that compromise, our focus was to get the word out immediately, right? And to make sure that people were aware of what happened, had the latest information. Fortunately, within a few days, companies like FireEye and also agencies like the Department of Homeland Security shared a wealth of useful information that allowed entities to assess the impact to their organizations and also take steps to mitigate further additional compromise. And so that's what we focused on getting out. And in the first month of that compromise, issued over 50 individual pieces of information to help the sector respond to this, right? Another example is, again, working with FERC. As I mentioned earlier, we issued a level 2 NERC alert, again, to understand the extent of condition and inform future steps regarding the response to the compromise. Now, fortunately, based on what we know now, as it relates to SolarWinds, it doesn't appear like that our sector was a target, but nonetheless, we remain vigilant. You know, that episode is not over. We will continue to learn more as the forensic evaluation of that episode continues, and nonetheless, we'll continue to reinforce the need to remain vigilant. And again, the more recent activities, including the Microsoft Exchange, vulnerabilities, compromises to secure remote access software like Secure Connect, code development software like CodeCov, just again really underscores the complexity of these supply chain attacks. So again, you know, from an industry perspective, it's those sort of incidents that we remain focused on, and making sure that we're able to defend against those incidents.
Thank you for taking the time to just step through that. I think it's critically important that people understand how much thought and how many resources are focused on this issue. You know, I remember when NERC was standing up the ISAC, and we were one of the first ISACs in the nation to actually have the type of organization that we have, and all of the battles that went into getting utilities to understand that this is something, a resource to help, and not, as you mentioned, some type of compliance effort. And I've just watched over the years how the ISAC, your organization, has grown and become more and more respected in the industry. So I thank you so much for walking us through that. And we'll have more questions at the end of the panel. Next up, we have Steve from PJM. Welcome, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. So my name is Steve Mcelwee, and I really appreciate the Commission's opportunity to speak here about some of the nature of cybersecurity from an RTO perspective. And I'm assuming that everyone's familiar with what PJM does and what an RTO is, but essentially the bottom line is we manage the flow of electricity to make sure that there's the right amount of generation to match the right amount of demand at the right time and in the right place. So I'll be sharing a little bit about some of the emerging threats that we see. And I think there's a lot of commonality with the former speakers in the panel sessions, and I really appreciate their perspective and their expertise. And I think you'll see a lot of common themes, which means we're all rowing in the same direction. I think we're facing the same threats. So if you go to the next slide, please. So when I started at PJM about 13 years ago, I sat next to a retired grid dispatcher, and he was very fond of telling me, he was brought back in from retirement for a contracting assignment, but he was very fond of telling me that when he was managing the grid, they didn't need all this technology. It just wasn't necessary. They could manage the grid with a frequency meter and a telephone. And you know, the grid basically boils down to managing the frequency of the grid to always be at 60 hertz. And if we have, like I said, the right amount of generation at the right place, the right time, we can keep the frequency at 60 hertz. A lot's changed at PJM since that dispatcher was on the bench. We were Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland, and now we've extended into the District of Columbia and 13 states. And if you go to the next slide, please, you'll see that, today managing the grid is very different. Today, we have a wider footprint that serves 65 million people, and we look at more than just the frequency to operate the grid. We make sure that the generation is always available. We're looking at 5-minute snapshots to see, do we have the right generation, but also are we routing the power across the transmission system in a safe and reliable way. We get telemetry data on a continuous basis. We call it SCADA data for some of the very detailed generation data. We get data from our energy management system, our partners' energy management systems. We receive synchrophaser data, which is the high fidelity version of what's going on in the power grid. And so today, really managing the grid is about situation awareness. It's about having accurate data that we can evaluate in a real-time basis, analyzing that data to see, do we need to make changes? Do we need to raise generation, lower generation, route power differently to stay within the conditions of the grid? So we determine the best course of action and we send out dispatch instructions. And it's not always by picking up the phone, although we do that a lot, but we can send signals out to our member companies, our transmission owners, our generation owners through electronic telemetry. And so today managing the grid is very differently. And we rely on this information for our situation awareness. As we look at the threats to the power grid, from PJM's perspective, then it's really about how do we preserve and protect that situation awareness that we need. If you go to the next slide, please. One of the top threats that we see, and I think you've heard quite a bit about that already, but it's tainted and vulnerable software. In our industry, we've really put a lot of focus on supply chain risk management. The FERC had issued orders that we comply with certain risk management practices for supply chain. NERC facilitated creating those standards. And as we've gotten through that and that's become enforceable, what we're finding is that we've gotten very good at vetting our suppliers. We're vetting them to see, do they meet security practices? And we're working through the challenges associated with that. But I think that some of what we're seeing is not associated with the vetting process. It's not associated with vetting, is there some malicious state actor involved in that software or the systems we're getting? What events like Solarwinds teach us is that the risk is far greater than that. And it's not just about a tainted supply chain, which is the case for Solarwinds, but the exchange vulnerability that recently came out was very impactful to a lot of organizations. So it shows that even those unintentional vulnerabilities really create serious risks for organizations, and we can be surprised by those. So when I started in cybersecurity, it was enough to just have a really good firewall and protect the outer perimeter of your organization and make sure you close up vulnerabilities quickly in your external facing applications. But the threat landscape has changed so dramatically that now the perimeter has not only moved in closer to the organization, but it's moved inside of our software in the very details, the detailed source code and the components that make up the systems. And so we've invited some of these components and these software products into our systems because they're needed to support that telemetry data and the situation awareness, but at the same time, it creates a different kind of risk. So as we move forward, we really need to look differently at this threat. And instead of looking at just vetting our suppliers and making sure that they're good suppliers to work with, we need to challenge our assumptions about how do we design our networks? How do we architect our systems so we create this level of risk for organizations? And I think that's something that we're still in the early phases of, and we need to continue to develop. But supply chain attacks are hard to perpetrate, right? I think that's what we've always assumed. It requires the capabilities of a nation state. If you go to the next slide, please. Today, we see a change in how attacks are perpetrated. And I like to use this analogy of a vending machine because in today's organizations, we're all enticed by the cloud, whether it's on-premise cloud technologies or off-premise cloud technologies. Everyone likes the premise of the cloud, which is it's like a vending machine. You can walk up and push a button and get what you want out of the vending machine. And in today's environment, it's great if you can walk up and push a button and get a new server in a few minutes. And that's the promise of this scalable, innovative technology that allows us to really be more efficient and get more situation awareness by getting more data and more systems to support that. And I'm not here to talk about the value versus the risk of cloud, but I would like to convey to you that this parallel exists on the adversarial side. And it's getting much easier, like a vending machine, for our adversaries to purchase attacks. And you've probably heard about it in the news: ransomware as a service, denial of service as a service. We're even seeing that this is breaking down further, and you can buy as a service just the initial compromise and initial entry into a network. So you can delegate all that out as if you're going up to the vending machine if you're the malicious adversary. And I think what this challenges for us is that we used to look at a combination of capability and intent from our threat actors. And we used to rate them and say, well, who's capable of compromising a utility? Who's got the intention to actually pull it off? And now, because of this vending machine mentality, it really is a lot easier for a lot of threat actors to gain advanced capabilities. And I see this as a significant and serious threat that we need to take seriously. And I think in critical infrastructure, we do recognize that, but it's even more of an imperative for us to continue to work on defending our networks. So we see the ease of conducting attacks as a second major emerging threat. But there's one more that I think is far more impactful, and I think you'll be familiar with this. If you go to the next slide, please. That threat is ransomware. And ransomware affects organizations large and small. It can be targeted, but in general, it seems like it's only targeting the victims with the deepest pockets. So it's not because we're electricity that we might get targeted, or not because someone's natural gas or telecom that you'd be targeted. It's who can be targeted and how can that money be ransomed from the victim. So it doesn't matter what your sector, and it doesn't matter if you're critical infrastructure or not, ransomware is really a significant threat. And I think that denial of service is a very similar type of disruptive threat, but most organizations seem to have commercial services that really mitigate that threat well. So it doesn't seem to be a serious threat, not as serious as ransomware. And I mentioned that at PJM, one of our primary focus areas is to use our situation awareness to give the best direction to our members on how to operate the grid. But what if our systems are unavailable? And what if we don't have the telemetry data that we need to identify the contingencies on the grid and adapt to changing conditions? In the Northeast blackout of 2003, one of the contributing factors to that was a loss of situation awareness. So we recognize from PJM's perspective, even though it may not be attributed to a nation state, or in the case of NotPetya, it could be attributed to a nation state, what we do recognize is that regardless of the perpetrator, it really is a serious threat for us. So in terms of emerging threats, I covered three: tainted and vulnerable software, the ease of conducting cyber attacks, and these disruptive attacks like ransomware. If you go to the next slide, I'd like to answer the question, well, what are we doing about it? And I think in this slide, you'll see that it's really a lot like what our other presenters have talked about. We use the cybersecurity framework. We portray it a little bit differently. We use the same functions that you've heard about: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. But we've adapted it using a systems view. And you'll see that we've positioned this for continuous improvement. We use metrics as our feedback mechanism. We use KPIs to evaluate our operational performance, and we continuously improve. And that's something that's part of the culture at PJM. And I hope that you've seen that in the past and you continue to see that. We've applied that culture to our cybersecurity program and recognize that in the face of these emerging threats, we have to continue to adapt, continue to improve. And sometimes our rhythm of improvement is on a weekly basis. Sometimes it's monthly, sometimes it's annual, depending on the perspective that we look at. But over the years using this framework, we've applied more advanced defensive technologies, sandboxing, use of continuous red teaming. We've applied machine learning. We've participated in R&D with national labs, defense contractors, and academia. But it all comes from the standpoint of identifying the most important risks and using an action-oriented program to make sure that we're driving those risks down. If you go to the next slide, the one thing that's important is we recognize, especially in our role, we can't do it alone. We rely on our industry and our government partners to be successful. We appreciate the opportunity to work with the district and the states and the PJM footprint to support each of your cybersecurity initiatives. And in addition to that, I've highlighted a few of our important partnerships that we work with. In the industry, we work a lot with the Electricity Sector Coordinating Council. We work with the other ISOs and RTOs through the IRC and talk about cybersecurity best practices across North America. We also work extensively with the North American Transmission Forum as we as an industry develop new and better approaches to cybersecurity, especially in the area of supply chain. I've personally valued the partnerships that I've had with my fellow panelists. PJM's made the EISAC the focal point of our threat information sharing with our industry partners. If people ask us for information about what we're seeing in terms of threats, we'll generally point them to the EISAC portal and say, we share there. And we think that the EISAC is doing a great job of becoming the focal point for threat information sharing across the industry. We've also appreciated working with FERC OEIS. Joe McClellan has provided industry a better approach to looking at cybersecurity, not through the lens of a regulator, but through a collaborator. And so we've really benefited from their assessments of best practices and what we can be doing differently. And we work with a variety of federal government partners that, each has made a different contribution to what we're doing, but each has been helping as we develop the concept of public-private partnership. And if you go to the next slide, just in closing, I want to thank you for the time again today. And reliable energy delivery, it really requires situation awareness, and that's fueled by data. And this data-centric approach has both benefits and risks. And with these emerging threats, they're likely to change. They change on a regular basis, but we always need to be working to continuously improve. And by working together with the states, with the government partners, with industry, I think that we can stay ahead of the adversary and work together. So thanks again for your attention.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks to PJM. You actually hit on a number of topics that I would like to explore more, and we'll have a round of questioning after we hear from FERC in particular, but I want to thank you, and just please stand by. Don't go anywhere. We'll come right back to you in a minute. All right. And next up, we do have Joe, who the last time both Commissioner Beverly and I saw you, we were doing a single-day read-in here in DC with a bunch of other commissioners to talk about some confidential matters. And so I don't know, we won't get that deep today, but we certainly look forward to hearing your presentation. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And there was no need to apologize for pronunciation of my last name. No offense was taken. I consider it a privilege to be a long-time colleague of yours and also a friend. And in fact, depending on the day, my name is challenging. Even I sometimes mispronounce it. So I just wanted to put that up there right up front. But thank you for the opportunity. You, Mr. Chairman, and Commissioners Beverly and Commissioner Thompson, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. If we go to the next slide, please. Thank you. We always at the commission start with a disclaimer. I did want to say even before the disclaimer that I do value this opportunity, especially to participate with my friends and colleagues from Manny Cancel from the NERC ISAC, as well as Steve Mcelwee from PJM. We value their partnership, and it's an information exchange. It is a partnership where we share information and we learn from each other. So I'll talk a little more about that. I am the director, so starting the presentation, I am the director of the Office of Energy Infrastructure Security at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And before we start, it is important for me to say that, to acknowledge that the remarks I'm about to make do not necessarily represent the views of the chairman, the commissioner, or the commission itself. So we can go to the next slide, please. Now, as many of you may be aware, FERC has varying degrees of authority over several different types of energy infrastructure. Interstate transmission, which includes the bulk power system, oil and natural gas pipelines, liquefied natural gas terminals, and hydroelectric facilities. These authorities are derived from the Federal Power Act, the Natural Gas Act, and the Interstate Commerce Act. Now, while establishing and enforcing regulations for energy infrastructure, FERC uses an open, deliberative, and iterative process. However, when considering the sophistication, speed, and specific targeting of cyber and physical attacks on energy infrastructure by advanced adversaries, FERC has determined that these threats require special treatment. For security to be effective, FERC may need to move quickly to address new threats, even without establishing new regulations. In these cases, the authority of FERC should be exercised in collaboration with other federal agencies, the states, and that includes the district, and with the owners and operators of the infrastructure. This is especially true when considering the increasing frequency and intensity of threats to energy infrastructure security. Now, let's take a look at some recent examples of cybersecurity threats, and I think between all of us, we've all mentioned these. Thank you. But just briefly, in early December 2020, a well-known cybersecurity consulting firm, FireEye, reported a cyber attack against a version of the Solarwinds Orion software. It's a widely used information technology and operational technology monitoring tool that accesses information about devices, applications, and software and firmware versions. A campaign targeted the automatic software update process for the Solarwinds Orion software and goes back to at least March of 2020. Over 18,000, and that number is conservative, and counting, public and private sector customers of the Solarwinds Orion product have been affected. The next one we have on there is Microsoft Exchange server attack. On March 2nd, 2021, Microsoft announced the detection of multiple zero-day exploits used to target vulnerabilities in on-premises versions of Microsoft Exchange servers, allowing access to these servers of U.S. entities as early as January 2021. Threat actors have targeted both public and private sector entities, and at least 30,000 organizations, and Mr. Chairman, I think you referenced a much higher number, worldwide have been impacted. And the last example I have on here, and these are significant examples, and I think Manny mentioned several more. On April 20th of this year, CISA issued an alert that it was aware of compromises in certain Avante Pulse Connect secure products, which provide access to information technology networks, applications, and data. The compromises allow for a variety of functions, including authentication bypass, multi-factor authentication bypass, password logging, and persistence through patching that allows further access and continued access on the networks. These compromises were affecting both public and private sector entities by a cyber threat actor or actors beginning in June of 2020 at the height of the pandemic and remote work. Let's go to the next slide. I put the links on here so folks could look these up later. But cybersecurity of our critical infrastructure is a top priority of the United States government. I put a few key excerpts from recent and ongoing initiatives and resources. Let's begin with the Worldwide Threat Assessment of 2021, and I'll quote, "Emerging and disruptive technologies, as well as the proliferation and permeation of technology in all aspects of our lives, pose unique challenges. Cyber capabilities, to illustrate, are demonstrably intertwined with threats to our infrastructure and to foreign malign influence threats against our democracy. Regarding specific countries, the Worldwide Threat Assessment names, and I quote, we continue to assess that China can launch cyber attacks that at a minimum can cause localized temporary disruptions to critical infrastructure within the United States. Russia continues to target critical infrastructure, including underwater cables and industrial control systems in the United States and in allied and partner countries. As compromising such infrastructure improves and in some cases can demonstrate its ability to damage infrastructure during a crisis." Next item I have on the list is the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, CSC. It was established in 2019, and I just want to make sure everyone's aware of these particular initiatives because they're referenced quite a bit by both industry and government agencies. So the CSC was established in 2019 to, quote, develop a consensus on a strategic approach to defending the United States in cyberspace against cyber attacks of significant consequences, end quote. The finished report was issued on March 11th, 2020, with the initiative continuing through this year, 2021. A central theme among its recommendations is increased public-private sector partnership. And I think that's been a consistent theme from all of the panelists. And then the President's National Infrastructure Advisory Council, or NIAC, is composed of senior executives from industry and state and local government who own and operate the critical infrastructure essential to modern life. At the President's request, NIAC members conduct in-depth studies on physical and cyber risks to critical infrastructure and recommend solutions that reduce risks and improve security and resilience. The January 21st, 2021 report, so just in this year, on January 24th, 2021, NIAC issued a report, and it builds on previous NIAC studies and the work of other organizations, recommending increased information sharing and collaboration between the public and private sectors, including the Critical Infrastructure Command Center, or CCIC. Most recently, DOE, and on April 20th of this year, so just this last week, the White House, NSC, DOE, and DHS CISA announced a 100-day collaborative initiative with industry to improve the cybersecurity of electric infrastructure. Quoting from the NSC, this is a coordinated effort between DOE, the electricity industry, and CISA. Public-private partnership is paramount to the administration's efforts because protecting the nation's critical infrastructure is a shared responsibility of government and the owners and operators of that infrastructure. The 100-day plan includes aggressive but achievable milestones and will assist owners and operators as they modernize cybersecurity defenses. And this to me is a key part, including enhancing detection, mitigation, and forensic capabilities, end quote. Now, in conjunction with the 100-day plan, DOE issued an RFI, stated request for information, stating that, quote, the United States government recognizes the immediate imperative to secure our electric infrastructure. The electric power system is vital to the nation's energy security, supporting national defense, emergency services, critical infrastructure, and the economy. The RFI asks for information from the private and public sectors on such matters as how it can assist and inform the states, including the district, the regulatory commissions that would include the DCPSC and FERC, and the utilities about procurement policies to address foreign ownership, control, and influence, and what actions the regulators should take. Comments to the RFI are due 45 days after it appears in the Federal Register. Those are a few of the resources and actions that are very recent. And so I wanted to make certain that they at least touched on that before we move on to FERC's program. So let's go to the next slide. Thank you. So the nature of the national security threats by adversaries that are intent on attacking our nation's energy infrastructure differ from the reliability vulnerabilities that have caused failures we have faced in the past. Widespread disruption of energy service can quickly undermine the United States government, its military, and the economy, as well as endanger the health and safety of millions of its citizens. This statement, this theme has been repeated by multiple federal agencies and the Biden administration. These threats originate from a variety of new and quickly emerging sources, such as supply chain compromises, insider attacks, targeted phishing attempts, ransomware campaigns, Internet of Things vulnerabilities, and many more. To help mitigate these advanced, persistent, and rapidly evolving threats, FERC uses a two-pronged approach. We employ mandatory regulations to establish foundational practices while also working collaboratively with the industry, the states, and other federal agencies to identify and promote best practices. Now, for instance, regarding mandatory regulations, the Commission has approved the Critical Infrastructure Protection, or CIP, reliability standards to establish a baseline to address such critical and fundamental matters as security management controls, protection of removable media, patch management, personnel training, and cyber incident reporting. These reliability standards are updated over time to address emerging issues. Now, while the NERC CIP reliability standards represent the foundation of the Commission's work to address cybersecurity, there are additional measures that can and should be taken to improve industry cybersecurity posture in light of these rapidly evolving threats. The Commission also partners with industry, and Steve Mcelwee is on the panel, and he is one of our partners. PJM is one of our partners. We have partnered with industry, the states, and other federal agencies, and I should also say that Manny Cancel has been a great partner too with the NERC ISAC, to develop and promote best practices for critical infrastructure security. Working with these organizations, the Commission helps identify new and emerging threats and the ways to defend against them, inform the private sector and the states about these threats and mitigations. And then we also conduct voluntary cybersecurity assessments and then assist industry with mitigating action. Now, for example, the Commission, through our office and with other participating agencies and even the states, conducts voluntary architectural assessments of the interested Commission jurisdictional utilities, their computer networks that control the operations of their facilities. We conduct on-site, these are conducted on-site, are specific to the organization, and we review everything from the configuration of legacy equipment to the application of state-of-the-art protection systems. More broadly, the Commission works with our partners at the NERC ISAC to rapidly issue bulletins and alerts informing industry of specific vulnerabilities and threats, as well as best practices to defend against them. In addition to these activities, the Commission also assists the states whenever we're asked to do so. So the last slide, please. So in conclusion, cybersecurity threats pose a serious risk to the critical infrastructures that serve our nation. Now, these are complex, persistent, and fast evolving issues. They won't be solved easily, and they require a great deal of coordination and communication. Therefore, the Commission has adopted this two-pronged approach to best address the important security matters. In addition, to effectively address these threats, the Commission will continue this important work with our federal, state, and industry partners on this collaborative basis. So thank you for your time and your work on this subject, and I look forward to any questions you might have.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you from FERC. And I want you to give my personal thanks to Chairman Glick for allowing you to, or permitting you to come and participate today. I have a number of questions. I'm not going to ask them all at once because I don't want to eat up all the time, but I want to kick it off here and just take a step back for a minute. You all have downloaded so much helpful information, informative information regarding cybersecurity and the threats that we have, especially, but we're the nation's capital. And I want to take a step back for a second and just, acknowledge the fact when you talk about supply chain risk, when you talk about fiscal, Metcalf came up. And, I've heard other commissioners say we were preparing for a cybersecurity attack and we got a deep freeze in Texas that knocked off so many different critical energy infrastructure and cost a lot of lives. And so it's easy for someone who's not a professional to hear this conversation and to get really afraid. And so I just want to just talk a little bit about, what are you getting from our utilities? What is your view of the preparation level of our utilities? Are you getting the participation? Are you getting the collaboration that you need from our local utilities? And anyone can take that question that would like to start off.
Sure, I'll start. And so the answer is yes. I think we are getting an increasing level of collaboration. And a lot of that is just a recognition of the complexity of these threats. And again, we are stronger collectively than we are individually, right? So I mentioned before, to the degree we share information and we maintain situational awareness, that keeps us ahead of us. The previous panel, you heard from Steve as well regarding the capabilities. And again, by and large, I think most critical infrastructure organizations, as well as the utilities, maintain very robust security programs aligned with well-recognized standards. And again, do that. I think the other thing that's unique about the utility industry is we have this concept of mutual aid, right? And we use that typically for storm response, but we've extended that to the cyber arena as well, too, right? So there is a cyber mutual assistance task force. Steve and I were involved in that when it was first created, but that still exists, and it exists to provide assistance to entities that may not have the capabilities or may be overwhelmed. I think, though, looking forward, the point about being scared. So I don't know that scared is the right word, but we must remain vigilant, right? Because this, as I said earlier, nothing is changing here. You know, velocity, volume, complexity is just going to continue to increase. You know, Joe mentioned the worldwide threat assessment, which basically said the bad guys are going to continue to be the bad guys. But Microsoft also published in their annual report of their vulnerabilities, a 50% increase in vulnerabilities in you know, affecting their software. And so the challenge for entities to respond to increases just in the Microsoft world is pretty dramatic. And again, you heard one of the previous panelists talk about the demand for cybersecurity resources is not being met by the supply, right? So that is another challenge that I think our members and our industry faces, you know, from a practical standpoint. So again, nonetheless, though, we'll continue to remain vigilant. There's been a lot of dialogue and information exchange regarding these recent compromises that have taken place. More of that needs to take place. Some of the things that the 100-day plan will focus on will shed some light and obviously highlight some opportunities. So I'll let my fellow colleagues here respond as well.
Steve?
Yeah, and I can offer a response to that as well. One of the things, you know, by nature, PJM is designed to engage our industry participants, especially those utilities within our footprint, and we get a lot of cooperation there. You know, when people ask me, how do you sleep at night, you know, knowing the cyber threat is that big, the one thing that I always go back to is I really rely on the fundamentals of the grid is that it's designed resiliently. We have a 15-year planning horizon. We have system protection mechanisms, breakers. We have all sorts of things that protect the grid. We have things like ancillary markets. We have, you know, reserve, and we have things that are built into the fundamentals which make us strong. And yes, we need to tackle the cyber threats, and we need to do that. But we find a great deal of cooperation and collaboration with the utilities in our footprint as we design a more secure and more resilient grid. And then, you know, working with Manny and the EI stack and across some of these other industry groups, we're all in this together. We're all recognizing that we need to partner and work together to apply best practices.
Joe?
Yeah, I would say this, Mr. Chairman. I would echo everyone's comments and say that we've only found willing partners. And really, to me, having been doing this for a while, it comes down to just 3 questions. Okay, the first question, and this is for industry, it's for states, it's for anyone involved with this. But the first question is, do you know who's targeting your systems, and do you know how they're targeting them? So that's the first one, because with a lack of threat information, you know, the utilities, the states, no one would be able to address the issue if you don't know who's doing that. If you can't answer the first question. Even if you can answer the first question, then you got the second question. And the second question is, even if you know that, do you know what to do to protect against these threats? You know, what are the most effective mitigations? What are the best practices that you can put into place to protect against these threats? Sometimes it's fairly complex. Other times it's fairly simple. So, you know, in many cases, it looks very much the same to me that 20% of the effort will still get you 80% of the result, but you got to know what to do. So how are the federal agencies assisting the states and the industry with those mitigations? And then the third is, even if you know the first 2, you know where to put those best practices, because typically item 2 is not going to be required by a regulation. I mean, I think there'll be guidance, there'll be regulations that cover the topic, but not necessarily the best practice that you need to put into place. So what are the small subset of the facilities that you own and operate that are sort of the keys to the kingdom? They're the linchpin associated with your utility networks. And that can be done in a very targeted, very efficient, and very expedient manner. So if we can, in everything that we do in our office, we're always looking to answer those 3 questions. So whatever relationships we have with the other federal agencies, with the intelligence community, with, as you're aware, the Director of National Intelligence, whatever relationships we have, we're leveraging that to get the information and then get those engagement sessions with the states and with industry. And just as in the case in the session that you sat through our good friends at NARUC, they help us facilitate that session, Lynn Constantini and NARUC. We didn't have anyone that walks away from any of those sessions and says, sorry, I'm aware of it, but I'm just not going to do anything about it. So I think cooperation is great with the other agencies. It's great with the industry, and it's great with the states.
Thank you. I thank you all. I thank you for your candid responses. And this is so helpful for me as a regulator, but just as a ratepayer too, just to know that we have good folks doing good work. Look, we have a few more minutes left. I want to turn it over now to Commissioner Beverly. Do you have any questions or comments for the panelists?
I don't have any additional questions. I think that was a very good presentation, and thank you for giving it to us. And I hope to hear from you in the future, either publicly or privately.
Thank you, Commissioner Beverly. Commissioner Thompson.
Yes, I do have a comment and a question. I think Steve talked about ransomware. I think that's particularly timely, especially here in the district. For those who aren't aware, the DC Police Department recently had a ransomware situation in which some people broke in and I believe got about 250 gigs of data and are now holding it for ransom. And so I thought that was very timely that this is one on everybody's radar, and two, that there is a plan to address it. My actual question, though, goes to Joe. At one point in your presentation, you talked a lot about what's going on in a national landscape with respect to a number of initiatives on cybersecurity, which is great. But one of the things I thought about as I heard you, talking about the number of initiatives and studies, white papers, etc., is do we ever reach a point where we have too many cooks in the kitchen, and such that there's so many working groups, so many people working on the same thing that we lack a cohesive, I guess, plan of attack moving forward. And just wanted to know if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. That's a great question. And I would say yes. I would say I think you can have too many cooks in the kitchen if they're not coordinating with each other. To me, I'll go back to one of the earlier presentations in the first panel, and I don't recall who said it, but someone had mentioned that there's a real shortage of cybersecurity experts, cybersecurity workers, folks that are being trained for cybersecurity and then entering the workforce. And that's my observation, absolutely, especially as technology is coming in, and it's really such a tidal wave fashion. And I know that Manny mentioned it, for instance, at the onset of the pandemic, everyone all of a sudden, or a huge part of the population, all started working from home using brand new technologies, brand new procedures that were just really just a fertile field for an adversary to take advantage of. So on that basis, to get the federal and government engaged and assisting the private sector, I really don't think there can be too many people, too many initiatives, and too many folks involved. However, they have to be carefully coordinated. So for instance, when we do our work, when we're doing an assessment, or we're doing a workshop and a briefing, or we're doing training, we carefully coordinate with our partners. So the Department of Energy, as a sector-specific agency and member of the intelligence community, the Department of Homeland Security, who has overarching responsibilities in this area, whatever it is we do, we invite them to those events. We have them participate. We exchange information with each other, and we coordinate and consolidate programs. So we're leveraging each other's activities as best we can. I'm not going to say it's perfect. Sometimes we may get folks may get in front of each other, but as best we can, we're holding regular meetings and we're trying to coordinate our efforts. So and that goes for the states. I mean, we will welcome participation. We will welcome assistance to assist the DCPSC in any way that it needs. We welcome that opportunity to review different projects or initiatives we can conduct together, because I think in the space it's that there is a shortage, but it has to be well coordinated, or I think we end up with a result that that Ian named. We may have too many cooks in the kitchen.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Commissioner Thompson, Commissioner Beverly. So at this point, we're at our allotted time, if you can believe it. And this is my fault, because my team told me They said, you're going to do this in 2 hours. You're not going to have enough time. And I said, oh, sure. Nobody wants to go longer than that. And I could do 2 more hours. But I wanted to talk about things like GridX with NERC, supply chain issues that you see at PJM, utility cloud services was something I had questions about, additional resources for our utilities and collaboration with the government. So that would be another 2 hours. But what I'll do, instead of asking all those questions, I will just want to hear closing remarks, and I'll let the panelists have the final word today. And we'll start from the top with Manny. And you can address some of that stuff if you like, or if you just to give us some parting comments, however you'd like to close out, sir.
Well, first, thank you again for including us here in this panel. I learned a lot from my fellow panelists and also the previous panel as well, too. So appreciate the opportunity to dialogue with you today. And I will take the opportunity to remind you that we are conducting another GridX this year. In November of this year, GridX 6 will take place. And we are in the stages of planning that scenario. So look forward to your participation in that. In terms of closing, again, now more than ever, there is a need to us to work collaboratively, to continue to work with our regulators, with our government partners, with our utility membership, to make sure that we are informed. Joe said it well, that we're informed of these threats, we understand the capabilities of our adversaries, and we collectively make sure that we're able to mitigate any unfortunate impact that we would want to avoid. So we'll remain focused on that. We'd be happy to talk about these topics again. And so thanks again for inviting us.
Okay, for my closing thoughts, I think, I echo Manny's thanks for the opportunity to contribute to the dialogue here. And I also took away a lot of very good themes that I want to follow up on. So thanks to all the presenters. I think the one thing I would leave you with is that it is a big focus of the electricity industry, especially, to be resilient. And we're looking at resilience at all levels, from the physical grid to how we operate to cybersecurity. And so, I would just leave you with the idea that this is one of the challenges that's top of our mind. We recognize the complexity, and we continue to be committed to working across the industry and with our government partners to stay ahead of these emerging threats. Thank you.
Thank you. Final word, Joe.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure I have much to add, except I will echo everyone's thanks for the opportunity to be here. I too enjoyed the panelists. I always pick up additional items, and today was no exception. And we look forward to working with you as you wish, and continued work with the energy sector, because, as I said before, the threats are very advanced, the actors are very capable, technologies are very new, and it really will take all of us working together. It remains, it is a top focus for this administration. It's a top priority for our chairman, and it's a top priority for our staff to be able to work together to address these issues. So we look forward to the ongoing discussions and collaborative opportunities. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you. I thank everybody for your leadership on this issue. Both panels today was excellent. I thank my colleagues. I thank their staff. And that concludes our conference for today. Everybody be safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.